Good evening, everyone. My name is Rudy Page, and welcome once again to another program from our series, A Chapter from My Life and Book. And this week we have Dr. Joan St John, and it's going to be most interesting. And this week, Nicholas is back. Nicholas, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Good to see you again. Good to see you again. Right, so good evening, Dean from Connecticut. Great to see you, as usual.
It's a pleasure being here, sir.
Thank you. And Dr. Joan St John, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks
Okay.
very much for having me this evening.
Great. Joan, before we start, just tell us a bit about yourself, your background.
So, hi everybody. My name is Dr. Joan St John. For many decades, I worked as a GP, but latterly I have been concentrating on and focusing on diabetes, mainly type 2 diabetes, but also type 1. And doing that within what we call primary care, which is like the general practice and community care settings. So I was one of the first Diabetes UK clinical champions. Diabetes UK is the largest charity for people living with diabetes in the UK. And also I'm the co-author of the book Carbs and Cows World Foods, which is why I'm here this evening. So yeah, that's me in a very brief nutshell, but that's how I come to be here this evening.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Nicholas.
So why did you write your book? What was the driving force in
Well,
writing this?
so thanks, Nicholas. So you asked why I wrote the book. And I mean, I say latterly, I've been focusing on diabetes. But, all those years back when I decided that I wanted to become a medic, that I decided I wanted to be a doctor, it was to help my community. That was it sounds really naive to say that now, all these years later. But when you don't have necessarily role models in your close environment, when you don't see people who look like you in that field, it is that sort of thing that drives you to do a profession like medicine. I didn't have any role models in my immediate environment. I went to a school where I was lucky enough to be put forward for exams, but they didn't actually encourage me to do medicine. But I decided, having done like science subjects and I like people, so I wanted to combine the two things. I was going to do medicine, but I was going into medicine to help my community. And I'll say it was a sort of tough journey through medical school, but I qualified. But again, always my focus was going to be on what I could do to help. So at various points, I've helped various organizations. And this is the long version of how I got to write this book. But I initially started with the Sickle Cell Society, which actually happened to be very local to me, and did some work with the Sickle Cell Society. Later on, when I was running my own practice, I did some work with the Alzheimer's Society and a particular group called Culture Dementia. And that, so, always I'm focusing on conditions that disproportionately affect African Caribbean peoples. So I also did some work with the African and Caribbean Leukemia Trust. And then in my career, I decided to focus on diabetes. So if somebody gets that shocking diagnosis that they have diabetes, because it is a shock, even though we know it's out there, it's a shock when somebody says that to you. The first thing you think about is, what can I eat?
Yeah.
Or what can I not eat, or what am I not supposed to be eating? So if you had, unfortunately, that diagnosis and you were from a white community, let's say, you know, we're in the UK, let's say a white UK community, you would be able to find information about the food that you might normally eat and how that might affect your blood glucose and your diabetes. If you're from the Black community, if you're from an African Caribbean community, you would struggle to find that information about traditional foods that you would eat. So yam, cassava, plantain, green banana, dumplings, you know, callaloo, whatever it is that you know, rice and peas, whatever it is you normally eat, how would that affect your diabetes? And you would struggle to find that information. Now, if you're from other communities, you might equally struggle. And it was that spurred me and a colleague of mine to decide that we were going to try and do something about this situation.
Good.
So the first time, what we had to do, and one of the things I would say is that you can't get any funding for this type of research. You know, once you mention that you want to do research, and it's particularly, I'm going back a few years now, let's go back 5-6 years. Once you mention it's for African Caribbean communities or other ethnic minorities, you will struggle to get funding. So what we did was we cooked the food, photographed the food,
Brilliant.
worked out the nutritional values of the food, and made a booklet to begin with. And we did that for 3 communities. And within our local community of Brent, which for people who know London, know Brent, will know it's like one of the most diverse communities in London, in the UK, actually. We used that to see whether the model that we had in our minds that might work, worked. And we found that it worked, and it worked amazingly well, because people thought it was only sugar, and sugar that you could see, so cakes, biscuits, sweets, chocolates, those sorts of things, that was going to affect your diabetes and your blood glucose. But when they saw that rice can push your blood glucose level up, sweet potato, yam, you know, there's nothing wrong with the foods, but they will push your blood glucose levels up because they're carbohydrate foods, they're starchy foods.
Is that though, Joan, does that relate to quantity?
Yeah. So they are healthy foods. There is nothing wrong with our traditional food. Sometimes the way we cook it might add a lot of calories. So if you're going to fry your plantain, I know I'm treading on very dangerous ground here, but if you fry your plantain, you're adding a lot of calories to it because of the fat.
Yeah.
So there's other ways that you can do it. You can slice it thinly. You can put it in a really hot oven, and you still will get that crispiness that you would get when you fry it, but you're not adding those calories when you fry it. So, and yes, Rudy, to answer your question, portion sizes are really important. You know, we like to put, well, some of us like to put, let's say, a lot of rice on the plate.
Go to a Caribbean takeaway. Yeah,
I know, because most of the food that you will get will be the rice and peas. Yeah. Go to a buffet, go to a celebration. What do you get on first? Yeah. You rice and peas. You might get dumplings. You might get yam. You might get, if you're lucky, you might get plantain. All of those are starchy carbohydrate foods. Now, if you're living with diabetes, that's going to push your blood glucose levels up. Not to say don't eat it, but maybe eat less. Because normally what we do is we pile one on top of the other so we can fit it all on the plate. But maybe one of the things to consider is maybe not to have as much of it, or maybe not have it as frequently.
So when we say to people about eat more fiber, what does that mean in terms of people at risk or with diabetes?
So I think I would say for everybody, it's really important to eat more fiber, because most of us are not approaching the amount of fiber that we should be eating in a day to keep ourselves healthy. It's important that our bowels work frequently and regularly, and the fiber helps to do that. The fiber also helps in terms of slowing the rise of blood glucose levels. So remember, most of the times I'm talking about people who are living with diabetes, be that type 1 or type 2, or people who are at risk of developing diabetes. If everything's fine with you, if your blood glucose levels are normal, this may not be an issue for you. It might be an issue in terms of putting on weight, but it won't be an issue in terms of your blood glucose. So fiber is important for everybody, whether you live with diabetes or you don't. It's important for a healthy diet.
So could you give us some examples of foods that are what we would call fibers?
So those wonderful healthy vegetables. So callaloo, cabbage, if people like carrots and broccoli, if people like peas, certainly people like lentils, so red peas, black-eyed peas, any sort of lentils will give you a lot of fiber as well. And if you go brown rather than white as a general principle, so if you're talking about a choice between white bread, brown bread, go for the brown. If you're talking about pasta, white pasta, brown, go for the whole wheat. Yep. So you're going to get more fiber if it's brown. Brown rice as well.
Okay, thanks. So do we still have a high level of undiagnosed people with diabetes, and what could be the early signs if somebody hasn't been diagnosed?
Yeah, unfortunately we do. I think there are a few of us now out there trying to raise awareness. I mean, I said earlier on that, diabetes we know is out there in our community. It actually is quite prevalent. So despite that, people feel it's not going to affect me. It might affect people out there, but it's not going to affect me. So in terms of raising awareness, what are the most common symptoms that people would get? So it might be things like being very thirsty. It might be things like passing urine very frequently. So people may find that they're going to the toilet 3 and 4 times during the night, whereas 6 months ago, it might be once. So those are the 2 most common ways that you can detect if somebody might be developing diabetes. But if somebody's feeling really tired, somebody feels just lethargic, no energy, sometimes if you have rashes, which are unusual for you, if you have wounds and those wounds don't heal as they would do normally, sometimes infections, and this can be infections around the genital area, but not necessarily. It can just make you more prone to infections as well. Those are the more subtle signs that or symptoms that you might be developing diabetes. But for some people, they just feel the same, they think. Then they unfortunately have a blood test, get the diagnosis. And when they look back, they can see, yes, they were lacking in energy. Yes, they were feeling tired, and looking back, they can see that there is a difference. But we want to raise awareness that people know as a race, we are at increased risk.
Of course.
Yeah. So knowing that there is masses that you can do about it, but don't ignore it.
That's a good message in itself.
Because of our diet specifically, or is it different diets from different groups? Is the black diet specifically creating diabetes, or is it?
No, definitely not our diet, because we know that now the other thing I have to say is a global thing, because people have this idea back home, everybody's very healthy and everybody is healthy, but let's not pretend that there isn't diabetes there, because there is. There's diabetes throughout the world, and it's not to do with our diet, absolutely not to do with our diet. Our food is good food. It's nutritious. It's healthy food. There's nothing wrong with it. But what tends to happen is we eat more of it now than we need to do, and we move less
Yeah, of course.
than we used to do. And so it's having more of an adverse effect on us. It's nothing to do with our diet and our food, definitely not.
Okay, thanks
We
for
think,
that, Jo.
oh, sorry, Rudy, I was just going to, can I say a bit
Yeah,
more?
absolutely.
Sorry, just to answer Nicholas's question. So Nicholas, I mean, remember what I said about, research, anything to do with African Caribbean communities, ethnic minorities, it's really hard to get the money. So it's really hard to get this specific information, but slowly more information is coming out. It seems that one of the processes involved with diabetes now is where you lay your fat down. So if you lay your fat down in your pancreas, which is the organ that produces the insulin, if you lay your fat down in your liver, it stops the body working as it should do and producing the insulin as it should do, using up the glucose as it should do, and that can then develop into diabetes. With us, it seems there is a critical amount of fat for different races, different individuals. And so you might look at somebody and think, well, they look bigger than me and they haven't got diabetes. Why is that? Because we're learning more that there may be like an individual level, which is critical for you, that tips you over into diabetes when you add on lots of other things. So if you're not exercising a lot, if you're eating maybe too much or eating the wrong foods, if there's a family history of diabetes, add all those things, then that may be why for you as an individual, you develop diabetes and somebody else, somebody else doesn't.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, because sometimes when somebody tells you they've got diabetes and you think, well, but you're not big, you're not overweight. So
Yeah,
exactly as
yeah,
you said.
yeah. That is the reason why.
Yeah. So how did you decide what to put in the book?
So remember I said to you that, for our little pilot, we had cooked this food and taken the photographs and used that to sort of try and gauge how well it would work. And we increased people's knowledge massively in terms of recognizing foods. And the other thing that people forget is the drinks. Drinks can put your blood glucose levels up as well. And people tend to dismiss that as not, not food, but actually they can do that as well. So we were sponsored by Northwest London to do this book. Now, if we look at the communities in Northwest London, it's the African community, it's the Caribbean community, South Asian community, and the Arabic community. So because we were sponsored by Northwest London, we were able to go to those communities, ask them about the traditional foods that they were eating, work out the nutritional content of the foods that they were eating, how that might affect their blood glucose. And with lots and lots and lots of surveys, we were able to work out the best way of demonstrating to the different communities how that might affect their blood glucose. So that's how we came up with this, unique blood glucose icon. So people can just see very easily how it affects their blood glucose.
Here's the evidence.
Yeah. And, you can see if you have, let's say, 3 tablespoons of rice. If you have 10 tablespoons of rice, this is the impact on your blood glucose. This is the impact of the 10. So there's a huge difference, but you can see a plate that looks like yours. You can see a portion size that looks like yours. You can see how that might impact your blood glucose because it's an illustration. But the other thing is you can also see then, if you, let's say you have the largest size, let's say for argument's sake, you can see how a smaller size might affect your blood glucose. And you can make that choice. It is about knowledge. It is about empowerment for you to make healthy choices, because if you didn't know how that rice and peas, let's say, for instance, was going to affect your blood glucose, how can you make the choice?
Absolutely.
And that was the major reason why we did the book.
Great, great. Nicholas?
So one extra question off of that. Do you think that affordability comes into a lot of these groups' diets because they come from maybe backgrounds where at some point in the past they had to make do with what was available or what was farmed or what was local to them. So they would eat mass amounts of a certain type of food because of what was affordable to them. And that has just stuck over time.
I think, Nicholas, thanks. I think that is more an issue now than it was previously. I say that for a number of reasons. So I say that because I think it was more affordable, more accessible, and easier to cook food before in years gone by than it is now. It's actually easier now in some ways to buy pre-cooked food, takeaway food, delivered food, than it is to cook that food. If you tend to cook at home, there is evidence to show you don't tend to use as much salt, you don't tend to use as much fat, your portion size may be different as well. So that, I think, is having more of an effect for some people than affordability. But affordability is a massive issue now. And unfortunately, they don't make the cabbage, the broccoli, the vegetables 2 for 1. They make the crisps buy one, get one free. Yeah. So, you know, everything is, not everything, but a lot of it is stacked against you in terms of wanting to eat more healthy and in terms of affordability. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, increasingly we have to push for. Knowledge is one thing, awareness is another thing, but then you have to make it available for people to be able to follow a healthier diet and affordable. Yeah.
Can I ask where your book is available to purchase?
So it was really important to us that the book be available freely. So within Northwest London, who had sponsored us to do this, we made sure that it is available in each library in Northwest London. So that was the most important thing that we had to do, yeah? And we did that. Then it is available for people to purchase. We don't make any money from it because for us, the important thing was that we got the information out there so people can have that knowledge and be empowered to make the choices that they want to make, whether that's healthy or they choose not to make that healthy choice. So it's available on Amazon, it's available in all the bookshops. So it's available in WH Smith, Waterstones, Diabetes UK have it in their bookshop as well. Yeah, it's available worldwide as well.
Thanks for that. So, Joan, how does this book relate to your life?
Well, remember at the beginning, I said that the reason why I went into medicine was I wanted to do something to help my community. And I think, you know, I had done various things along the way, as I said, working with the different organizations, doing what I can whilst, I mean, I have to, you know, admit, if you're running a practice, it is very difficult to do other things as well. If you have a family, it's very difficult to do other things as well. So I did what I could whilst I was running my practice, while I was bringing up my family. I found myself with a tiny bit of time. And so I decided I was going to, well, I think I've learned how to manage time well, these, you know, after decades in practice. So I decided that this was something I really could do. This was something that would help people. It's people living with diabetes, but it's also people at risk of developing diabetes, which is actually all of us from our community above the age of 25. And I don't think people realize that from the age of 25, our risk of developing diabetes starts to increase. Yeah, so it was something to try and help our community to see if people could have that information.
And of course, we can get diabetes at any stage in that journey of life. So we may have got through our 30s and our 40s and our 50s. Because I've been surprised when people have said, you know, after so many years that they have in fact got diabetes.
Yeah, but I think there's a, you know, there is that fact. And two things. I'll do the tough bit first. To me, the tragedy is that now we're seeing young children, adolescents, teenagers who are developing type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is the type of diabetes which is more associated with lifestyle, not only associated with lifestyle, but is definitely associated with weight. And, you know, to me, that is a tragedy that we would see children, teenagers developing type 2 diabetes when this used to be the case of, as I say, people in their 40s, 50s and upwards. My mum was at 80 when she developed it. So, you know, it used to be as you got on in age, but now the tragedy is because of the way we're eating, because we're not moving as we used to, because we're not living healthier lives, that teenagers are developing it. That's a tragedy. There is some good news in that recent studies have shown that if you have type 2 diabetes, you can actually put it into what we call remission. And for somebody like me who has been focusing on trying to provide knowledge and information and care for people living with diabetes type 2, that is amazing news. And the even better news is that you can actually do it through lifestyle. So it's not about a medication. You can actually put your diabetes into remission through lifestyle. And that is fantastic because, you know, it doesn't have any side effects. What could be more natural than lifestyle?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's great news to me.
Yeah.
But catch it early.
Yes.
Don't leave it, and don't do anything about it. And it's the same thing with what we call pre-diabetes or non-diabetic hypoglycemia, or being at risk of developing it. So blood glucose levels is a little bit high, but not in the diabetes range. Again, that can be pushed back to normal with lifestyle. Again, not medication, lifestyle. And people like herbal remedies, people like natural remedies. And I say, what can be more natural than watching what you eat and being more active and losing some weight?
Can I ask a quick question on, if I'm treated, what kind of damage can diabetes do to an individual?
Consequences.
Yeah. Complications is the other way that we describe it. So again, tragedy, because most of it can be avoided. I say from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. If you imagine that you've got blood vessels going all over your body. So diabetes, when the blood glucose level is high, can damage those blood vessels. There might be small blood vessels, there might be large blood vessels. The small ones are the ones that goes to your eyes, goes to your kidneys, your nerves, your feet. The big ones go to your heart, your brain. So you can imagine that your eyes can be affected, so people can lose vision. Your nerves can be affected, so people can lose sensation, have numbness or pain. And, you know, those are miserable things to be living with, especially if you can avoid it. It can affect your legs so that you have difficulty with walking. It can affect things like your tendons, which people don't realize. So things like frozen shoulder are more common if you're living with diabetes. But all of these complications may be avoided in certain people. And the best way to avoid it is don't get diabetes in the first place, if you can avoid it. Now, I'm not saying everybody can avoid it. I can't say that. But if you can, by losing weight, by watching what you eat, isn't that better than going towards complications?
Yeah, of course. So you've kind of told us who should read the book, but it also sounds as though it's something that could be used by diabetes champions, trainers, trainer type. Could you talk about that a bit more
Yeah.
detail?
So, I mean, I have mentioned who should read the book in terms of people who may be living with diabetes, people who may be at risk of diabetes. But I think if your blood glucose levels are normal, read the book anyway, so that you don't get to the stage where you're at risk. So I'm not, for sales, as I say, we make no money from it. Everybody read the book, at least have a flick through, because it's a real eye opener. And yes, we want people like diabetes champions to use it. So in their work, again, trying to prevent diabetes and raise awareness of diabetes. Social prescribers have been using it. People on the National Diabetes Prevention Program. So that's the one for people who are at risk, to try and help them with their lifestyle, to help them prevent diabetes. They have been using it. Various coaches on different programs. So again, on remission programs for people who are living with type 2 diabetes, they have been using it. You have to give information depending on your population. So when I work with different populations, and I work with many different communities, I will try and tailor the advice that I give to that community. And that was what was missing for us. So in areas where there are large African, Caribbean, Arabic, South Asian communities, this book is appropriate for them. But if you're from, let's say, a Polish community, then this book is not going to be appropriate for you. But I want you to have the information that's going to be appropriate for you, because diabetes fundamentally is about food.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question? You feel that through the examples led in your book, that it will also prevent diabetes, but it would help to extend your life in different terms, so your body health overall, through just considering these factors?
Yeah, so we have tried to give healthy living advice. So we've tried to give complete nutritional information. Of course, we're focusing on carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are the nutrients that have the most impact on your blood glucose. But we have also given information about things like calories, the fat content, and, as we were saying earlier, things like the fiber. So we've given the complete nutritional information about the foods. We've also given just general information, so about, alcohol, how much alcohol is advisable, exercise, what exercise is advisable for you, which is basically anything. I used to have a chart which showed how much calories you can use up from vacuuming, from hoovering, ironing. So, anything can count as exercise. You don't have to put on the Lycra, you don't have to go to the gym. Okay, anything. And walking, again, sometimes these things sound too simple, but walking doesn't cost you anything. You could do it in your house, in your home. You can get some tins and you can do some weight training as you sit down, or if you stand up. If you've got stairs, go up and down the stairs, don't use the lift. So there's lots of different things. And we've tried to give general healthy living advice in the book as well. The other thing we've tried to do is to give what we've called healthy swaps. Now, we've actually got 750 food photos in the book. So there was a limit to the space that we had available, but we tried to do some healthy swaps as well. So the healthy swaps are showing plates whereby instead of having like 3/4 of your plate full of rice and peas, you might have a quarter of your plate full of rice and peas, but you might have some other veg on there. You might have some callaloo, you might have other veg instead of, let's say, yam, dumplings, rice and peas, as well as your chicken and fish. Yeah. So, how you can reduce your carbohydrate content massively if you're living with diabetes or at risk, and still have a full plate and still feel full, because that's the other thing. People don't want you to say, don't eat this, and then not say to them, well, maybe you could put something else on that plate and the plate will still be full and you still feel full.
So Joan, as we, through the pandemic and heard a lot about underlying conditions. So what has been your experience as it relates to this era we're in now and people living with diabetes?
Well, it's very personal. It's been a very personal, and it's been a very painful experience. I said, my mom has diabetes, type 2. I have many relatives who live with diabetes, who were living with type 2 diabetes very well before the pandemic. Now, I don't know what their blood glucose levels were. They wouldn't necessarily tell me that. That's not something we necessarily talk about. But I know that I have lost so many relatives through the pandemic because of the underlying health conditions that they had. And that has been something that spurred me on to do what I can to make sure that other families didn't go through the same situation. We lost relatives, I would say, at a rate that I would think would be like a 10-year rate.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. We have been through 18 months so far. I lost an auntie and an uncle within 2 days of each other. I have lost 6 relatives over the past 18 months of people living with underlying health conditions. Now, before the pandemic, as I say, they were living with those health conditions and they were living fine. It has been devastating to the family. It has been absolutely devastating. And I'm determined, and I have done what I can through the past 18 months to make sure that people have, again, that knowledge, that awareness, and then are empowered to make the decisions that they want to make. Now, I'll say I had the vaccine, I'll say that. And I wasn't saying to people, you must have the vaccine. I was saying to people, this is the information about the vaccine. Please don't take your information from WhatsApp. Please take your information from the evidence and then make your choice. But I was determined, for our community, I talk about Brent, which is where I spend most of my working life. In Brent, we had a 3 times increased mortality if you were a Black man living in Brent compared to the rest of the population. Devastating, absolutely devastating with the pandemic. If you had diabetes, you were more likely to have admission to hospital, go on a ventilator, and unfortunately pass away. So it has really spurred me on. It spurred me on because of the devastation that our family has experienced. It has spurred me on for the devastation that has been around me in the environment that I live and work in. And it has been devastating for our community. And I was determined I was going to do what I could to try and prevent anybody else experiencing that. And so I've done lots of webinars, as I say, giving information,
Yeah.
making sure people have knowledge and awareness and the evidence so they can make informed choices.
Thanks for that, Joan. And I know from evidence, you know, we've been on one or two of the same webinars, and you've really done a great job. And that whole focus on the trusted messengers, I mean, you're definitely one of the key people who brought that about, you know, people like Dr. Donald Palmer. There are others, of course. So no, it's been great. Right, we've come to the end, but as usual, I'm going to give the last word to Nicholas from EALING Libraries. Nicholas, over to you before we close.
I'd just like to say a big thank you, Joan, for being a part of this show, and also for all the hard work that you've done throughout the whole pandemic. The NHS has kept many, many, many of us alive, and we need to say a huge thank you for all those people who put themselves at risk in order to look after us, especially in the Black community and Asian community, those doctors who put themselves out there despite what the records were showing. Amazing people. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, and thank you. You're an incredibly interesting person who are helping a lot of people, so thank you. Please continue to do. And also look out for Joan's book in our library.
Absolutely. Give us the title again, Joan.
It's called Carbs and Cows, World Foods.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and good night all.
Thank you.